Thanks so much for joining us today. This is Industry.live, and we're speaking with Julia. Today, Julia joins us to talk about data and AI. She runs her own business and she is a professor at NYU. Julia, can you please introduce yourself for our audience?
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm Julia Bardmesser. I created my own data advisory consulting firm called Data4Real. And I concentrate my superpower is to figure out how to get value out of data analytics and AI for businesses that it aligns with their business goals. So I don't necessarily advise on how to do the coolest tech or how to do the coolest POC. What I do is how do you understand what the business goals are that can be served by data, by AI? And then how do you build a roadmap that you actually get to your goals as opposed to just, building a bunch of things that nobody will use and just going off rails. So that's what I do in the business. And the reason I'm doing this, I've done it for over 25 years in the corporations and financial services. In many companies, I've led many data and analytics and technology transformation initiatives in very large financial services company, such as Citi, Deutsche Bank, Voya Financial. And then I decided that I'm kind of done with the big companies and I want to do what I do and do it with many people or help many companies. And I also want to not just financial services, but also nonprofits and biotech companies. So that's been very interesting. And what you mentioned, teaching. So I've created my own curriculum around business value of data. And I thought that that's not really being taught in university, especially not in business schools. So I have been able to persuade Stern School of Business at NYU that they have a gap, and they agreed. And now I have a course that I teach, and I teach it to MBA students on how to bring value into their businesses on data analytics.
All right. So the reason I reached out to you to chat about AI was because I read an article that you posted. It is called The Kitchen Window Effect: Why AI Exposes Every Data Flaw You've Been Hiding.
Okay, yes.
Can you tell us about that story?
So that's a very interesting story. So I've been thinking a lot, right? I've been doing data forever. And honestly, I've been doing AI forever as well, because before Gen AI, there was machine learning, data science. Before that, there were quants. So I've been working with analytics and with using data to predict and to drive business forever and ever. But of course, now, especially with ChatGPT and everybody seeing the magic of AI, it's became much more hyped. And also you have a lot more capabilities than we've had even 5-10 years ago. But but I look at it from the point of view of data, because obviously there is not much you can do with AI if you don't have good data. And data management discipline, data governance discipline has been there forever. So data warehouse has been there forever. Data governance, especially in financial services after the financial crisis, been there forever. Reference data management, master data. So all of that, we've always tried to do it or created roadmaps to do it. Businesses knew they should do it. So it's been there. So the question I've been thinking about a lot lately, how does Gen AI, what's the difference? And there is difference. So you have, for example, records management, unstructured data, governing and understanding unstructured data becomes much more important. Generally speaking, people like chief data officers, sometimes they have records management under them, but usually it's a stepchild. I mean, not to offend any stepchildren in the audience, but stepchild of grim fairy tales. It's something that you have to do, but it's not cool. It's even less cool than usual data not being cool. But now with Gen AI, especially, how much of it relies on unstructured data, that's really, really important. But again, we've always done records management. We always knew it was important. We just, so at the conference, I was leading a panel, one of the conferences, and I always encourage, and sometimes that kind of backfires on me, a lot of audience participation. And this was a fairly small room, and it was kind of closer to the end. And I said, okay, we're going to have this conversation, but let's have a joint conversation. Let's have participation from the audience. And so we started talking, the whole panel, about what's data for AI. And the guy raises his hand. He says, okay, guys, everything you're talking about, we've always had to do it, right? So you're talking about records management, and you're talking about semantics, and you're talking about knowledge graphs, and you're talking about master data management, and you're talking about metadata management. Like, it's all, we've always knew we had to do it. What's different? So we tried, we didn't have a good answer, honestly. My answer was, well, but we never really did unstructured data management. Like, not really, no. And semantics, we always thought it was really cool. Knowledge graphs were always a technology data people really loved. Could never find a good business case that was good enough to satisfy the amount of effort and money it needed to take. Yeah. So I started thinking about it. So getting back to my newsletter, and that's what I like. It's not that you have to do something significantly different. It's just now it's very visible when you don't do it. So you could get away with not having business metadata because, I mean, it was good to have, you would have been more efficient, but you wouldn't get necessarily wrong answer. Also, you didn't have agentic AI. So your risk was that people would look and it would be wrong number or mislabeled on the report. But the person could ask questions and they kind of, people usually understand the context if they're in the business. If you have agentic AI, if AI agent goes off to do something, it doesn't understand the context unless it's given the context. So now the visibility of the wrong information and wrong action being taken, it's much more visible, especially with the desire of everybody to put chatbots. So have agents, AI agents, customer facing.
So, in your opinion, what is the right way for companies to look at this problem so that they can solve the challenge that they're facing?
So this is what's interesting. It's not really a new answer. And this is one of the things I actually struggle a little bit in my business because AI strategy AI is a data capability. And to build the AI strategy, it's overall data capability strategy, which has to be aligned to the business strategy. So you have to look at it holistically. And companies understand, but data is really hard and really expensive. Otherwise, I would have sold it by now, right? And I wouldn't have had a job for a while now, given how long we've been talking about this. So, in my opinion, companies have to really do this. Again, it's hard. You need, I think, one of the biggest things, because it feels like you need to boil the ocean. You now have to do everything all at once, everything everywhere all at once. It's a wonderful movie, but not about that movie. Actually, that's probably a good title for a newsletter. I think that was a pretty, it was a pretty popular movie, right? Everything everywhere all at once, right? Something like that. But you still have to identify what is your most likely business use cases and build your minimal viable products and do it kind of in a measured way and build it, because you can't boil the ocean, especially large companies. There is a lot of data.
So, for companies or leaders thinking about this problem, what are some of the first steps they need to take now?
So first, understand that AI is not magic. Second, understand that you can't do AI separately from your business strategy unless you have an unlimited or large experimentation innovation budget, and you can set that aside and have a group of people who are off in the corner doing cool stuff. Some companies do have that, and they should absolutely do it, but most companies don't. So first one, it's still, what are the business goals that you want to achieve? And then which of those business goals would be helped by analytical AI capabilities? And then you have to go and what is the strategy? And then what's the skill set? Skill set is difficult because there are a lot of people out there that at this point are all about AI. There are not as many people who actually know how to do it. And some of the use cases, when I talk about that are easier, they're not easy. So, for example, document management use case. The reason why law profession is not as much of a slam dunk as it used to be, or law degree, because all the junior lawyers do document production. Well, with Gen AI does document production both better and faster and cheaper than lawyers that just came from law school. So, but it's not a very simple use case. You still need to have a skill set. You still need to have an ability, like the technology pieces to it. There is document management piece. So it's still not a simple piece. So I think the very major thing is it's not magic. It's not that you can say, I'm going to get an AI consultant in, and 5 minutes later, I'm going to have enormous productivity enhancements that I can lay off a bunch of people.
So, with documents and with data, there are companies that are now able to help move unstructured data into more organized
Yes.
databases. They're also able to take printed data and move that into
Mm-hmm.
JSON files or more manageable sort of structures. In what capacity will that help AI?
I've worked with some of those companies and I've kind of talked to many of them. And a lot of those companies grew from information security records management space. So the questions they were asking, where do we have documents in our landscape, in our technology estate? Are they the documents? Do they have any sensitive data? Especially those companies are very helpful, or those tools are very helpful when you move to the cloud. Of course, you need to move documents to the cloud, and you want to move the right documents, not all the documents, to the cloud. So that's why they started. And that's an incredibly useful tool set for AI as well. Now, it does need to be enriched because it's not only metadata about, so what they do, they look at the metadata of the files, of the unstructured data. You do need to get some way to look at the data and it's what's inside. And some of it is for sensitivity and some of it just to be able to use it. I think and I'm not like there are people who are much better technically on that question than I am. My understanding though is that it's better to move it to JSON type of format versus structured versus relational database, especially if you want this to use this data in LLMs. Like knowledge graph and JSON structured formats are actually much better for LLM. But this is, again, I'm sure you can get guests that are much more technical and that would give much better advice on the technology. This is just, my understanding based on all the conversations I'm having with people and the stuff I've done myself as well.
So right now, what would you say are conversations that leaders are having in their journey to launching and using AI?
So yeah, major question is, do we have a skill set, right? So question number one. Then I wish they were asking, I don't think they ask as often as I would like, is why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? It's not even necessarily ROI specifically in numbers, but why are we doing this? Because it's not a cheap technology, it's not an easy technology, and there is a risk associated with that. So the why has to be beyond, oh, it's a cool thing to do. So that's especially the data leaders and data analytics leaders asking those questions. Do we have data? Is this data in such a way that it can be used, and do we have rights to it? So that's another really big thing. It's ethical use of data. You should only be using the data you have rights to. So do you know what you have rights to, where the data came from? So there are purpose questions, I would say. There are talent questions, people questions, and then there are data questions. There is also a question, a lot of it of AI is around automation of the process. So again, one of the questions I wish people would ask, it's not, so I've had some experience and I've stood up RPA practice at Voya, robotic process automation. And it was a very interesting experience. It's, again, back then, this was about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, was very, very hard. Everybody felt that if you put a bunch of robots into your processes, you can let go of people their enormous savings. Well, no, not really. And the reason is that there is a possibility of bots creating savings and streamlining the processes. But before that, you have to standardize the process. So if you have a convoluted process that's never been streamlined or standardized, if you have, for example, if you have two business lines that are both doing onboarding of customers, but they're doing it completely differently, and you're trying to create bots that are helping in like one step at a time, it's not going to save you any money. It's just not. It may speed up that speed so you can get better quality and maybe higher speed, definitely higher speed than a human, but you're opening it up because bots, especially non-AI based bots, are not very flexible. Humans are very flexible. When you need to get information out of the file, you really don't care whether it's PDF or Word, Microsoft Word. If you're a bot and you've been taught and your code is how to read PDF, you can't read Microsoft Word. You're not adaptable. Humans are very adaptable. So with AI, obviously, that's a question of training and so on. So AI helps with that. But the major piece, it's not so much that you can put now bots everywhere. It's that you first need to look at your business processes with AI first lens and see and change that. And that's a culture change, right? Business process change is a culture change. And that's the most difficult thing I ever had to do in my life. And all of the companies and the clients I've worked with, culture change, like you can do technology. Culture gets really difficult.
So you talked about people and you said, do we have the talent? Can you elaborate? Do we have the talent that understands data? And do we have the people that companies can tap into to build the data repositories they need?
Oh, from data perspective, yes. So I was thinking more in terms of AI skill set and understand. So let me answer your first question first, and then I'll move into Gen AI for AI type of. So there are definitely a lot of data engineering, data warehousing, data movement talent out there. That's never a problem. Data management, not as much. So this is actually one of the interesting takeaways from my teaching at NYU. So I have this class, and it's an MBA level class, and it's about how to create business data strategy that aligns with the company's goals. It's not a technology class. There is a little bit of very high level technical information in there. I do talk about what is master data management and what is metadata management, but it's not hands-on. There is nothing technical in that class. They open class for all master level students at NYU. I had 50 people in the class. Almost half of them were from computer science department. And I was kind of surprised. And I asked, like, guys, okay. And it was actually difficult to teach because I had business people who wanted more on strategy. And I had technology people that wanted me to deep dive into exactly how do you do master data management. And I asked, like, guys, okay, you're welcome in my class, but why are you here? And they said, well, this is the only class. In computer science department, there is no class that teaches us data management. There is data engineering, there is data science, there is data warehousing, there is no data management. So one of my plans, once I finish writing the book, which is hopefully going to be like in 2 weeks, I'm going to submit it to the publisher, so I'll have more time. I'm going to reach out to computer science department and say I should and offer to build curriculum for them. So data management, there are some programs out there. I know they exist in universities that teach data management as a discipline, but there aren't many. So that's a little harder to find. AI is kind of interesting. You have a lot more programs teaching data science as opposed to teaching data management. So pretty much every school has data science program. They teach it though in a very weird way. Again, I've asked that the same class, I asked them because I touched on semantics. Like in one class in 10 minutes, I mentioned this and everybody looked at me like, we don't know what you're talking about. And I said, didn't you take data science classes? They said, yes, we did, like computer science portion of my class. I said, okay, did they not mention data semantics or ontologies? No. So that's a whole different conversation. How do you teach data science and AI without ontologies? So, but you do have a lot more. But the challenging skill is not how to write machine learning models. You have tons of mathematics, physics, computer science majors that are really good, and there are a lot of them who can create the models, who can test the models, who can do. What you need is understanding of what's the right place to use the model, how to train the model, how to know whether the model is right or wrong, how to error check and do all of that. So there is the skill set that I think we are just developing as data analytics industry around what's the appropriate use of the model, because models themselves, I believe, will become commodities. The same way as Gen AI, like no company that's not in technology business should be using Gen AI. Should be developing its own Gen AI model.
When you say you teach business value of data, what is the course like? So, what kind of strategy are you teaching, and what does that really translate into when people graduate the MBA program and go out into companies?
So the whole idea for the course started at my last job. And what I came across, so I was in a very privileged position. I had a multi-year approved data initiative. I had budget. I built a team. I had use cases. So the issues that a lot of data leaders face, I actually had it quite well. I mean, I didn't have as many. But what I did have is, so when I was in the room and I was working with people who came to the capabilities that I've built, and wanted to use them. Obviously we had challenges, but it was fairly smooth. Where we ran into challenges was that what I was building was using the data generated by front office transaction systems. The systems were old. They've been built 20, 30 years ago. They were not standardized, all of that. And they were continually developed. And people who were making decisions about that were business people in the business lines and technology executives in the teams that were supported. And I could be in every meeting. The decisions that they have made around prioritization. Do you prioritize the feature or do you prioritize standardization? They usually went for features because you want to bring more to your customers. You want to build more capabilities. You want to bring more for operational people. Standardization of data, standardization of data coming in, going out, that always fell to the bottom of the pile, especially if that was data that they were not using. So they were not making data-centric decisions. And it's not because they were they were trying to maximize to what they saw their own goals. So what they teach is, and I had to explain a few times how if you have standardized way to identify the customer, or you have standardized way to identify your product or your service, you will achieve your goal. But it took me a while, actually, after I left, because when you're working in the company, you have deliverables and you're executing. There isn't all that much room in your head to deliver, to create a whole new discipline. But what I understood that I wanted to build, and that's what I'm teaching, how do data capabilities enable business goal? So if you have a business goal, what do you need? What kind of data do you need? But beyond data, what kind of data capability do you need? And so that's what I teach. That's how the course is structured. So I have a framework that I call business value of data. And we go through that. And it's many companies achieve growth in the same way. They need more customers that are buying more of their products at a better margin and at acceptable risk. That's like 90% of the companies. That's how they grow. So business strategies go either we want to have more customers, we want to retain customers. We want to develop more products. We want to cross-sell more products. We want to make sure customers buy a more expensive, more revenue-generating versions of our products. And we want to do it at a good margin. So like majority of business strategies are around that. And data and data capabilities play into every one of them. So that's where I start. And then I go through case studies and I go, well, if this is the goal that you want to do, let's go through what does it take to achieve that goal. And if you have data and data capabilities, how that would help achieving that goal. So that's how the course is. It's all business case studies. So it's a couple of frameworks, and then I just go through case studies that I've came across both in my work and now with my consulting clients. So that's what we do. And then they get to do one themselves.
Since I have you here and since you are very familiar with this, can you give us a good short introduction to metadata and master data? I hear those terms a lot. I know anyone in AI is interested in that. Can you help us understand what that is?
Sure. So this is actually something that I do in my class. How do you explain, and this is again one of the reasons for me creating this course, because I was asked by CEO of the company in executive committee meeting, so what is that master data? And she wasn't actually challenging me at all. So as I said, I had fun. She just wanted to understand why any strategy from the business side, I would come back and say, okay, so we need to extend our master data management platform. And I tried to explain it to her in the meeting. And obviously, executive committee, when CEO is asking you a question, is a little bit of a high pressure situation. So I didn't do a great job. I used Google as an example. For example, if you go to Maps on your phone and you go to Maps on your laptop, it knows your history, right? And behind that is the fact that Google knows who you are. I mean, Google knows so much about you. That's a whole different conversation. But they do master data management really well. So she kind of got it, but it was not relevant to the business in which the company was in. So how I explain is when you have information about your customers coming from different areas. So for example, if we take a bank, if you are a banking customer of a bank, you have, or actually let me do even an easy example. Let's say you have a credit card with the bank and you have their app on your phone, and you go and you open another credit card. If your credit card, the second one, shows up on your app within seconds of you opening an account, they have a good master data management. So what they've done behind, they have validated who you are. They now know that you're the same person that has another card, and they connected both accounts, so you don't have to do it. Now, and there are companies that do it extremely well. Now, if you have to wait overnight for that to happen, that means then they don't do it at onboarding. It's not when you become a customer. There is an overnight process. And for some credit cards, still, you have to go in and you have to manually add your new account. And yeah, I'm not naming names, but they're very well-known card issuers that you have to manually add your new account. And then it knows you're the same person. That company does not do master data management. So that's what master data management is. It's connecting different sets of information you have about your customers that come from different channels or from different products. So you can do the same. For example, if you are, let's say, phone customer, cell phone company customer, and you're also Wi-Fi, but if they keep sending you invitation for Wi-Fi on your phone, they don't know you're also Wi-Fi customer. They don't have master data management. But if they all of a sudden cross-sell you on both platforms, then they do. So it's actually very easy to see. This is one of the first exercises I do in the class. It's actually a question I ask even before the class starts. I said, you need to come to the first class having thought about which companies you do business with, who you think have good, that manage your data well, and give examples where they don't manage your data well. And you know, the number one company that came out, manage your data well, was Spotify. Yeah, they said that they manage the data really well. They know who I am. They know what I like. Like majority of people said that Spotify does really. I don't use Spotify, so I have no personal opinion of them. I don't have any personal experience. But according to all of my students, Spotify does a really good job managing data. So that's master. Did that help? Did that make sense to you?
It did, yeah.
So metadata is a little bit more complicated because it's kind of a hidden discipline. So metadata, it's data about data. So you know how, and a while back, there was a whole conversation of whether or not the phone calls, information about phone calls could be given to a government. You know, it was 5-7 years ago, more innocent times. So the information in question was not the content of the calls. So the legal question was, so you can't put a bug on the phone unless you have a warrant. But the question is, can you get metadata about the call? And what is metadata? It's where you were when you made the call, how long was the call, and what was the number that you called. That's metadata about the call. So the question was, does metadata about the call fair game, and can cell phone companies or telecommunication companies release that information to the government even without a warrant? So that's a very, and I don't know where it landed. We kind of moved on to worse questions. So, but that's what metadata is. It's not the content, but it's information that makes sense of a content. And if you have, if you think about a very simple example, especially for technical people, is database record. If you have name and bunch of numbers, you need to, let's say you have a name and bunch of dates. So which date is which? One of them may be birthday date. The other one could be account opening date. The other one could be account closing date. Some of them you can kind of figure out just because you probably were born before you opened the account, and you probably opened the account before you closed the account. But then if you throw other things in there, you need to know what those things are. But that's also meaning, right? Somebody actually gave about the context and metadata a very good example. And I need to recreate that picture. So if you have picture, imagine you have a picture of 5 cats and then a tiger. So the question, is the tiger a cat? And the answer actually depends on context. So if you're talking about the pets, tiger is not a cat. But if you're having biological discussion about cats in Africa, tiger is absolutely a cat. So it depends, right? So that's where the context. And if you ask the question of your model, of your large language model, and you ask something, it needs to know, do you count tigers as cats, or tigers are not cats? So it needs to know the context. So that's where metadata and the context becomes really important.
So for your students, obviously you prepare them to work in businesses where data is something they need to understand. For that class, what would you say would be the next step to take data into the AI space?
So I do cover AI a little bit. from data governance perspective. So I talk about what it is, and I talk about how AI creates additional challenges for the governance and data management. If the students want to move into AI space, again, you have, as usual, you have two areas. One of them is purely technology, which is building system software, models, what have you. The other one is business use of it. And that's where I started. That's where we really don't have a lot of skills, which is understanding what are the appropriate use cases, how do you do proof of concept, how do you move it to production, what are the questions you should be asking, what the question you shouldn't be asking, so all of that, how do you frame a problem for appropriate Gen AI application, and especially for agentic AI. I think that's a skill set that a lot of students, I would hope, would go on to develop. But for the business people, it's more, okay, I want to do this. Here is the capabilities I have. It's not just marketing, sales, finance, accounting. I also understand how I need to prioritize data capabilities and data to achieve my goals. Kind of my goal is fairly simple. For this course is for the people who are going to be chief data officers like 10 years down the road, easier time of it in the executive committee meeting and not having to explain what is master data management and how does it help with cross-sell.
You talked about use cases, you talked about POCs as a next step. Could you give us maybe some best practices for people to follow? Because everyone wants to develop their own use cases right now. Everyone wants to move them to POC stage. What are some of the best practices or benchmark guidelines that you would recommend?
So one of them, first question to ask is not only can we do this, but should we do this, right? So I think Jurassic Park movie made that point. Don't get so excited about what you can do. Start with should we do it, right? So that's the very first thing. So still, it's always, always, always start with the why you're doing it and what value is it going to bring. And if the value is of your POC that you're going to develop a skill set within the company and introduce new mode of thinking that you're not necessarily thinking production, but you just want to try it out and see how you within the company, that's a fine objective. But you need to be it needs to be an objective. Eventually you want to get to the point where there is actually value. So the first one's why. The second one, do you have data for it? Not only do you have data, but do you have rights to the data for it? And then the next one is, do you have a skill set to appropriately use this data? Do you understand which models to use? So then it becomes technical considerations. And then can you integrate? So another piece that very often gets missed in all of the development of the models and scenarios. How are you going to use the result? Is it going to be used in any of your business processes? So if you're trying, for example, one of the often mentioned use cases is that instead of having lots and lots of dashboards and reports, we're going to put a chat interface and just ask questions. Okay, the huge difference between having a report and asking questions. The report has requirements, has an owner, has somebody who defined what it is. When you go to ChatGPT, and that's the experience people are looking for, you can ask any question. And one thing about the models, they will make stuff up and it will look really, really correct. And if you don't know what's right, what's wrong, you can get really bad answers. So before you start putting AI, Gen AI type chatbot interfaces on all of your data, make sure that you can actually produce right results. Because again, problem with Gen AI, it doesn't produce one result that's right or wrong. It produces many answers, and 90% of them could be right. Then you have 10% that would be wrong, but you will not know till you won't know. So that's one of the things to always keep in mind.
You talk about data rights quite often. What do you think is the number one challenge when it comes to data rights?
Well, so actually metadata management. I'm going to go very technical. So to know whether or not, so companies have a lot of data, right? And especially if you're in Europe, you always kind of have to go in and say, I'm allowing you to use your data, my data for this, but not for that. And a lot of companies, so you do, but it's a customer data, right? And you really want to use customer data for your model training and for executing, predictive modeling. You need to know which customers allowed you to use which data in which scenarios. So this is metadata, right? Data rights management is metadata management. And again, this is one of those disciplines that's difficult to establish because it's kind of hidden. There is no, till AI and data rights, there is no clear line between metadata management and business results. So a lot of companies are way behind on it. They have data catalogs and they have descriptions, but making sure that every piece of data carries with it what can it be used for, that's not a discipline that's developed broadly. And people don't like thinking about it also, right? Because you just want to use the data you have. Well, you shouldn't be using this data. It has to be ethical use of data. So data rights are important. The same goes, having said that, this is very similar. I don't know if you ever, like way back when, market data. So a lot of companies buy market data. When you buy market data, you, in your contract, there are usually stipulations on when can you use it. So some market data you can only use for the trader who trades, but you cannot save it. Some data you cannot use it within the first 5 minutes, but you can use it 10 minutes later. So, and it's all different contracts. And once you get data in house, contracts are here, data is there, people are very, very creative. And they say, well, we have this data, we should use this data. And then one of the scariest portions is when the vendor does an audit of usage and you become liable for whatever. So you usually, a lot of companies end up having to pay fines for misusing the data, and their next renewal is much more expensive. So I've dealt with it many times, like starting probably 20 years ago at Freddie Mac. I wrote the whole white paper on market data management in Freddie Mac and trying to solve for this problem. So it's a very similar problem, except now it's, as I said, now you have a window into the kitchen. So before that, vendor had to go and do an audit and catch you, and all you had to do is maybe pay a fine. Now, if you don't do this right, and you put agents in front of the customers, and it becomes visible that they're using data that they've never given rights to, that's a reputation risk. That's a much worse exposure. So again, now you have window into the kitchen.
The part that you just talked about at the end, I would really want to know more about it. I feel like there is a lot to say for that shift in power. So when you had vendors using, audits to understand if data is being misused, they had a lot of power. But now with customers, right? There are a lot of customers who would probably see that my data is being misused, but one, they wouldn't know what to do about it. Two, they would find it hard to consolidate that power and sort of take action in a way that typically in the US is called a class action lawsuit. So they wouldn't really be able to do anything like that. What are some of the things that companies should be thinking about with that in mind, with that reputation risk in mind, and with that thought of protecting the consumer in mind?
Yeah. So I'm not sure I have the questions. I'm not sure I have the good answers. I think one of them, it is a reputational risk for the companies. So if you're B2C, if you're facing to consumers, consumer may not want to sue you, but they will step away. And so your brand would suffer eventually, right? So it may not be an immediate effect, but it might be a very significant effect down the line. Of course, if you have a monopoly, it's a different thing. But even if you also open the door to a new player coming in, if you have significant number of your users unhappy with the way you produce it. So I think there is, consumer does have a power over the tools, again, in the B2C companies. So, and I think it's still a developing area of the law. So I'm not expecting a lot of regulation in the United States anytime soon, but Europe is looking at it, and Europe has put something in place around AI regulations and fair use and all of that. Part of it is regulation, part of it is market, part of it is something we haven't thought about yet.
Have you seen any companies that are doing a really good job of managing metadata and ethically using data and creating really amazing AI solutions at scale, but still doing everything right?
It's hard to tell from the outside, right? So we know, do you use ChatGPT?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I use ChatGPT. And we all know that ChatGPT used content that they had no rights to. So we know, but we're taking advantage of it, right? Because it's almost free to us. Generally speaking, I'm not companies that manage metadata well, like Google creates metadata. It manages it well. Does it? I have no idea internally, but not, how good they deal with the rights and all of that, with the ethical. So that's really difficult to tell from the outside unless it's something that stares you in the face. This is one of the things. With master data management, it's actually fairly easy to see who does a good job with master data management and who doesn't as a consumer from the outside. Metadata management, it's harder to see.
I think one of my last questions right now would be for companies who are looking at engaging with you, who are looking at fixing the data challenges they have. Realistically, what is the journey like in terms of time? Do you think it's a 1-2 year exercise, or do you think it's going to be usually for a large company a 5-year exercise that they need to keep in mind?
It depends on the size of the company and where they are currently. So the way I approach it, there are two parts of it. First one is I call it discovery and value. And this is what I talked about, business value of data, understand the goals of the company, understand what capabilities, what data do they need to build it. So that creates a strategy. To achieve that strategy, they need to have a certain number of capabilities. And from kind of high level, data capabilities, they're like 5, but specifics obviously vary a lot. So this is the first part. The second part is understanding where the company is currently. So I have a different framework, which I call data centricity framework. And I look at the current state of the company, and it's not only technology, it's also organizationally and culturally. And so between those two, so the first one is this is what they need to have in terms of capability, a target state to achieve their goals on the repeatable, sustainable, scalable basis. And this is where they're currently. And that informs minimal viable products. So what do you start building with? So what will it take to bring value in? That's not going to take years. It's going to take, again, depends on the size of the company and size of the goal, but it's usually between 3 to 6 to 9 months. 9 months is something that's, if it's really complex and large company, usually it's like 3 to 6 months. And then you keep building on it. And that's how roadmap is created. So overall, to get everything done, it could be up to 5 years. It never really, so you don't stop with data strategy. You don't stop with data capability. The same way you never stop, like you never say, okay, we have built sales capability, we don't need any more salespeople. Or we've built marketing capability, we don't need to do marketing anymore. We have it. The same with data, it keeps developing, but if you have the building the foundation, once you get like about 4 to 5 iterations into building up on your MVP, especially if you take into account and you build cultural and organizational capability, then it becomes self-perpetuating. The organizational cultural piece is really important. So making those data-driven decisions by business people when data people are not in the room, once you get there, you're good. You still may build a lot more technology, and you would, because technology changes. AI models we talk about today are not going to be there tomorrow. Something's going to be there tomorrow we have no idea about today. So technology will evolve, but the decision and cultures, once that takes root and gets supported by continuous value delivery, then you're done in terms of the transformation. You just need to keep developing the capability, right? The same way, as I said, marketing, sales, everything, all the other capabilities that you have.
Awesome. I think that's really good. I have all that I needed. Are there any questions that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you?
Oh, you asked me a lot of questions. I'm not sure that I had good answers to all of your questions. So yes, I think I think that's pretty good.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to end the session now. I think I'm going to thank everyone for joining us today for our podcast. I'm really excited to share this with the audience. I think it'll be a really great listen. And I hope they join us again for the next episode. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me.